Yeah, I hope that you hearing me. This is the future, all about cybersecurity. Talking about the hackers, I'm just trying to warn you. From the one and only legend, the cyber informer. Hey, yeah, this is the cyber reformer. This is the cyber reformer. Let's go.
It's time for the Cybersecurity Business Connect and Protect Central Coast informational video. I'm Michael Trimblett, the Cyber Informer, and today we'll be talking about the Essential 8's Configure Microsoft Office macro settings. Microsoft Office macros have been a source of virus infection and network compromise for a long time. If you don't use macros, protection is easy. If you do use macros in Microsoft Office, it can be rather tricky to enable protection while still running the macros you want. In this video, we'll show you the fundamental ideas behind configuring Microsoft Office macro settings, talk about some of the gotchas, and I'll hack myself using a Microsoft Word document. Let's go. What are Microsoft Office macros? Microsoft Office is a popular suite of applications which are used for word processing, spreadsheets, and reading email. They are the cornerstones of the cloud service Microsoft 365. Microsoft Office applications can execute macros to automate routine tasks. However, macros can contain malicious code, resulting in unauthorized access to sensitive information as part of a targeted cyber intrusion. Macros were a popular vector for virus infection back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Microsoft started to include the ability to turn off macros in Office 2000, and the default behavior is set to disable macros. However, if you need them, it is easy just to turn the ability to use them back on. These days, you must save the document as a macro-enabled document, or in the old-style .doc or .xls document format, as the default document these days, .x and .xlsx documents do not support storing macros within them. In other words, it's getting harder to save macros in documents. So what does Configure Microsoft Office macro settings mean? In the Microsoft Office Trust Center, there are a number of macro settings. Disable all macros without notification does exactly that. No macros will run in Microsoft Office, and it won't even tell you if they are disabled. Disable macros with notification will give a notification as you open the document. This allows the user to enable the macros by simply clicking on Enable Content. There isn't much protection here, especially if the end user is naive to cyber threats. Disable all macros except digitally signed macros. This is the hardest to implement as it involves the use of certificates. I've never seen anyone implement this, however, it does help with protecting against untrusted macros running on your computer. Then there's Enable All Macros, and as it says, it is not recommended because potentially dangerous code can run. The Microsoft Office Trust Center also allows for trusted publishers, documents, and locations. All of the macro security options will be covered in a how-to video in the premium subscription. Get your propeller hats ready because it can get complex. To read more in-depth information about the Essential 8's recommendation for macros, head over to the website address on the screen. For the general Essential 8 information, go to https://loyalit.com.au/E8. This will redirect you to the government's website. As recommended by the Essential 8, this table displays the security benefit, business impact, and implementation difficulty of different approaches to managing macros in Microsoft Office files. Starting at the top, the Essential 8's recommendation is to disable macros full stop, because it gives the highest amount of protection and is the easiest to implement. Run macros from only trusted locations can be difficult to manage, especially on networks. In fact, Microsoft's recommendation and default setting is to not allow macros stored in documents on your network to run. Only macros digitally signed by trusted publishers are enabled. This is very difficult to implement, and even more difficult if you are sharing a document with a macro in it with someone outside of your organization. Users decide which macros to enable on a case-by-case basis. From a management and IT security perspective, putting the choice in users' hands is never a good idea. All macros are enabled is even worse because you can enable a macro to run as soon as you open a document. If this has been done by a hacker, you could compromise your computer. The scary thing is that Microsoft Publisher has less security features which can allow hackers to bypass some of the security controls Microsoft have implemented. So if you use Publisher and download files from others, be especially careful. Now you know what macros are, how do they work, and how can this affect you. For that, we need a propeller hat zone. This section is rated 2 propeller hats out of 5. As we'll be looking at the code, we will run a few macros to see their effect, and I will actually hack my computer using a malicious macro in a Word document. So what can macros do? Well, the answer is almost anything you want. They can pop up a dialog box on the screen to say hello. They can type repetitive text like "this is a test." They can issue commands back to a hacker. Let's have a look at these examples in a demonstration. Okay, this is my Microsoft Word. So we'll have a look at the macros that are installed on it. To do that, I go into the Developer tab. In here, we'll go and click on the Macros button. We can see there that there are a list of macros on my machine. So we'll click on "This is a test," and then we'll click the Edit button to see what it does. Okay, so we have the macros. This lists out all of the macros in the system. So if we go and have a look at "This is a test" macro, this will type the text "This is a test" and then press enter. There is a "Say Hello" macro, which will pop up a message box on the screen to say hello. Then there is this "Evil" macro, which does all of this. If we scroll all the way down, we can see that there is a lot of weird looking code in there. Now, that is what's called shell code, and that code will execute and do whatever the hacker wants. So Microsoft Office will recognize that code as something. We don't particularly know what it's actually doing, but it will read it and it will do what the hacker has programmed them to do. So let's have a look and see what these macros actually do. So we'll bring up the macro and we'll go, "This is a test." We'll run that macro. All right, we get "This is a test" typing in. We'll go back and we'll get it to say hello. All right, it pops up a message box on the screen to say hello. Now, let's have a look at my hacking machine before we run the "Evil" macro. This is my hacking machine, all set up listening for a connection back to it. So let's have a look now and click on Macros, Evil macro, and we'll click Run. And if we see on my hacking machine, I've got a connection in there. So this is what the hacker will see at their end. So if we have a look, we can have a look and see what's in that folder. Nothing terribly of interest. So let's go back to the C drive and have a look. Well, look at that. There's something called My Secret Files. Why don't we go there? Let's have a look in there. Ooh, got passwords. Look at that. We can actually list out all of the passwords that were sitting there in my passwords file. So if we just go back to my machine, we can then have a look and see where this file actually is located in Windows. Okay, here is this PC. If I go into my C drive, we'll see, look, there you go, My Secret Files, and there's my passwords. So when we go into that, we can see, yep, that's the same as what I saw here. So I've successfully now hacked my own computer using a Microsoft Word document. We're now exiting the Propeller Hat zone. Now we know why it is so important to restrict the use of macros. In the premium membership, there'll be individual videos in each of the Essential 8, which will dive into each of the maturity levels and what you need to know to implement them. For the moment, all we need to know is there are 3 levels in each of the Essential 8 items: maturity level 1, 2, and 3. To be fully aligned with Configure Microsoft Office macro settings maturity level 3, we must conform to the following strategies. Microsoft Office macros are only allowed to execute in documents from trusted locations where write access is limited to personnel whose role is to vet and approve macros. This isn't too challenging to set up on a network which has a Microsoft Windows server running it. This is more difficult when you only use Microsoft 365 and SharePoint and you don't have a Windows server. Microsoft Office macros in documents originating from the internet are blocked. Again, this can be done, but is much easier if you have a server. Microsoft Office macro security settings cannot be changed by users. This can be done, but is much easier if you have a server. The settings cannot be changed by users is a tough one to administer without a server. So what did we learn? Configuring Microsoft Office macro settings is very important. As we saw from the demonstration, you can get hacked pretty quickly from a specially crafted macro in an Office document. If you have no need to use macros, turn them off. This can also be referred to as application hardening, as it is disabling unneeded features. If you need to use macros, they should be run from trusted locations. Configuration and implementation is not as easy as it sounds. Macros should not be allowed to run if you downloaded the file from the internet. Considering what we have seen from the demonstration, this should be a no-brainer. If you don't run macros from trusted locations, make sure you sign the macros so untrusted macros do not run. This is a good defense, and I would have to say it's my favorite, but it is the most complex, especially in environments that do not have a server. Thank you for joining me for a look at configuring Microsoft Office macro settings. Don't forget you can contact me via email, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Until next time, stay safe online.
Oh yeah, this is the Cyber Informer. Hackers, you going down like, oh yeah, this is the Cyber Informer. Hackers, you going down, yeah.